Hi, everybody. Mary here, and welcome to Chapter 8 Pluto, Comets, Asteroids, and Meteorites. This is one of my absolute favorite chapters. The Just such fun topics. This video is all about Pluto. So let's talk about Pluto. Its discovery started with Percival Lowell. Percival Lowell, you may remember this gent from back when we talked about Mars. He was a wealthy fellow, came from a wealthy family, and a Renaissance man. He liked studying all sorts of things from health and the world and history and things like that, and he got into astronomy. You may remember he spent a lot of time, money, and interest studying the canals on Mars. Well, because of that, he established the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. There were some wobbles in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune that they could not really be established. And so it was hypothesized that there was a ninth planet out there. So Lowell said, I am going to find that ninth planet. And he hired this fellow, Clyde Tombaugh, who was not a professional astronomer, was not college trained, but he was a very, very experienced amateur astronomer and a very hardworking, very exacting fellow who was very good at his craft. And so he hired Clyde Tombaugh to actually look for Pluto. And Clyde Tombaugh did discover Pluto. He is credited as the discoverer of Pluto back in 1930. So to give you an idea of what Clyde Tombaugh had to do, he took pictures of the night sky back in the regions towards Uranus and Neptune. And he would look at a photographic plate, and then a few days later, he would take another picture of the night sky, and he would look for any one of these dots, these multiple dots, that would move from one night to another night. And he would do that back and forth and back and forth. And the two things indicated by the arrows here are motion of Pluto. And he did that over time, and he saw something that moved, and ta-da, he had discovered Pluto. And the reason I love showing you these pictures is to help you understand how difficult it was before the computer age. All of his observations were done via these photographic plates and with his eyes. So it was a tremendous discovery for the 1930s. When Pluto was discovered, they didn't know exactly what to name it. There had been a naming convention of gods, of Greek and Roman gods. And so through the astronomical community, it's like, what are we going to name this thing? And the granddaughter of a fellow out in the world, an English gentleman, her name was Venita Burney, and she was 11 years old, and she suggested a name to her grandfather. She said, well, it's so far away and it's so dark, let's call it Pluto for the god of the underworld. And her suggestion was chosen as the official name, and hence it was Pluto. It also happened to be sort of popular because buried in its symbol is PL for Percival Lowell, the gentleman who put up the money for this quest to discover it. So it worked on a lot of levels. Pluto is so far away that sunlight takes 5.5 hours to reach Pluto. And if you were standing on the surface of Pluto, it would be 55 degrees Kelvin or minus 380 degrees Fahrenheit. Very, very cold. Another thing I think is interesting, if you and I were standing on the surface of Pluto, the sun would look to you and I the way that the planet Jupiter looks to you and I from Earth. It would be a small, bright dot in the sky. So it certainly wouldn't look like our bright, shiny sun that you and I see today. Pluto is quite small. It's got about 1/6 the mass of the moon. Force of gravity on it is quite small. If you weigh 100 pounds, you'd only weigh 8 pounds on Pluto. If you weigh 200 pounds, it's only about 16 pounds. And yep, you could go on the Pluto diet and you'd weigh a lot less. To give it a perspective of size, Pluto, if you put it on top of the continent of Australia, it would pretty much fit right there. It's got an incredibly eccentric orbit. And so it's always been a little bit of an oddball. All the other planets orbit pretty close to that plane of the ecliptic with the sun at the center. And then here is wacky Pluto, 17 degrees off from that plane of the ecliptic. So we've always had this idea that it was an add-on feature. It came later in the history of the solar system. So that was a clue that maybe it wasn't one of the original planets that we started out with. 1 year on Pluto is 248 Earth years long. And what that means is in the history of the United States in 1776, and we declared our independence, Pluto has not had one complete orbital year. And that's pretty wacky. Between 1989 and 1999, just because of the eccentricity of its orbit, it happened to actually be closer than the planet Neptune for that brief period of time, which is kind of cool that most of us have lived through that. And this is not going to occur again until the year 2227. Pluto, we have now learned since the New Horizons mission that Pluto has many moons, but it has one primary moon, and this is Charon. In 1978, Charon was discovered with better telescopes aimed and looking at Pluto. Charon was the boatman that would carry people to the underworld in Roman mythology. But the fellow who discovered this moon, his wife's name was Charlotte. And so he also wanted to honor his wife. And so when you pronounce it, you kind of say the beginning for Charlotte. And so it's Charon is the pronunciation, not the old Roman Charon. So Charon is how you say this with the beginning, like Charlotte, which is kind of cool if you know your astronomy. When Charon orbits Pluto, it orbits it once every 6.4 days, and we can tell this because it goes in front of Pluto and occults it every once in a while in those orbits. It's very much like a double planet system, more so even than the Earth and the Moon. And the pictures here happen to be Hubble images from the 1990s. Well, the biggest thing that ever happened to Pluto in our history is the New Horizons mission. The New Horizons mission was launched in 2006. After 9 years and 3 billion miles, this fabulous spacecraft actually got to Pluto. Prior to that mission, this was the best picture we had of Pluto. And those of you who were paying attention back in 2015, I don't know about you, but I remember the very first time I saw this image of Pluto with that very distinctive heart on the front. And I still get chills thinking about it because, wow, we just never saw the face of Pluto. This was the best image, even with the Hubble Space Telescope. This was as good as it got. And all of a sudden, we had this distant object in great detail. When the New Horizons mission got there, we realized that we could see lots of its moons. It has multiple moons. Here are some of them. Charon, of course, but Styx, Nix, Kerberos, Hydra. You know your mythology. Those are all characters from the Roman mythology and the underworld. And it has a wacky collection of moons. This is that beautiful New Horizons photo from July of 2015 that was published with that beautiful half heart. All of these fabulous colors are indicators of the different chemistry going on, and that beautiful planet became part of our solar system in more detail. Now, since then, with the mapping from New Horizons, we have a lot more detail of that heart region. And I just want to share with you some of the names that have been officially approved for it. The heart region is known as the Tombaugh region, and that is, of course, for Clyde Tombaugh that discovered Pluto originally. Every planet or its moons has a naming convention. And for Pluto, it's anything that has to do with Pluto, of course, explorers and space missions. So Viking, Terra, Pioneer, Voyager, these happen to all be space probes we have sent out into space. Hayabusa, that was a Japanese space probe that was sent out in space. Lowell, good old Percival Lowell, is remembered by getting an official area of Pluto named for him. Burney Crater, this is Vanita Burney, that young lady who helped name it. So it's kind of fun. We try, astronomers, historians, we try and make the names meaningful, but it's kind of cool. Sputnik Planum, this is that beautiful plane as part of that heart. Sputnik was that first Earth satellite that went around and orbited the Earth. So that is a map of some of those important features on Pluto. When New Horizons got there, we took pictures of the actual Pluto atmosphere, and it has this beautiful blue glow around it. This was after the spacecraft was leaving Pluto, turned around, and this is the atmosphere looking at it, looking back at the sun. And you can see this beautiful nitrogen glow. Here's another picture. You can actually see layers in the atmosphere of Pluto. Mostly nitrogen, a little bit of methane, but there's actually nitrogen, which means there's a little bit of heat to make this a gas as opposed to just liquids or solids. Excuse me, solids mostly on Pluto. There are mountains on Pluto, mountains and glaciers, but the glaciers, some of them are water ice when we've done some investigating, but a lot of the craters and glaciers on the mountains of Pluto are actually methane. Now, methane is what a lot of people use for cooking. If you have natural gas piped into your home, that is methane. Well, on Pluto, it happens to be a solid, and these are solid glaciers of the stuff. And that can only occur if it is very, very cold. After New Horizons left Pluto, it still had energy and inertia in its tank. It could still go onward. And so after leaving the Earth past Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, they plotted a course and they found a trans-Neptunian object, and they said, what can we intersect? What else can we look at? And they found a little floating thing out here in the Kuiper Belt, and they gave it the nickname Ultima Thule. And Ultima Thule meant beyond the mystic far north, for something that was far away and quite cold. And they aimed it for it. It has since been given an official name, that's the way it works in astronomy, Arrokoth. And Arrokoth means sky or cloud in the Powhatan language, and they are native peoples from the Maryland, United States area. And it has this very distinctive snowman shape. Now, Arrokoth has the distinction of being the furthest away object we have ever visited. Now, you might say, why did they want to take a look at this snowman-shaped rock out there? Well, one of the things science is always trying to do is understand the creation of our solar system. With these close-up pictures of Ultima Thule or Arrokoth, look at these bumps and lumps, and they have analyzed them in great detail. We have always thought that planetary systems have been built by collisions of lots of small rocks coming together, banging together, and creating enough heat to fuse them. Well, by analyzing this small thing that is left over from the creation of the solar system, you can actually see the individual rock fragments. And it's kind of like getting a baby picture of the solar system. And scientists are using this to help us analyze how was the entire solar system put together? How was our planet Earth born? And all the other moons and planets of the solar system born? So this whole thing, if this is 5 miles, the whole thing is maybe 20 miles across. And it's just so incredibly nifty. All right, next video, we'll talk about what happened to Pluto and what occurred with her being downgraded to a dwarf planet, and we will see you next time. All right, bye-bye.